Welcome everyone. My name is Divya Pawar and I am a training coordinator at the Temple Small Business Development Center. We help small businesses start and grow, and we're doing this through consulting over the phone or through Zoom and with a robust calendar of training events. Today's webinar is on podcasting for your business 101 production. In this webinar, we will discuss all the skills you will need to successfully host and produce your own podcast show. This webinar will be presented by Tony Lopes, who is an attorney in the Greater Philadelphia area and the managing partner at Lopes Law LLC. For the webinar, we have all the attendees muted, and we encourage you to put your questions in the chat or Q&A. All attendees will receive the presentation and recording after the webinar. And with that, I will turn the floor to Tony.
Hi, everyone. Good to see you again. Those of you who are back, if you missed last week's and you are here, I do encourage you to go back and watch that webinar from last week. We will do an extremely short recap of some of the stuff that we talked about last week that's relevant for this week. I'm also coming to you, as you can see, from a different little image. I'm coming to you from my webcam this week because I have my actual microphone and camera behind me as examples of some of the equipment that I use. And we'll talk about that when we get to equipment. So today's webinar is specifically about podcast production. So again, last week, we went over sort of some general concepts. We talked a little bit about development and pre-production, thinking about your show, thinking about your target audience, really wrapping your head around what your show will be at a 30,000 foot view. Today, what we're talking about with respect to production is, okay, we've designed a show, we've thought about our target audience, we have an idea, we know what we want to do from an engagement perspective. Now we've booked some guests, we've reached out to some people, we've booked some guests to come onto our show, and we're going to sit down and record it. We're going to talk about a few different things that aren't on the slides tangentially, which I know some of you have questions about. One of those things will certainly be regarding what to do with respect to remote recordings, right? We're in the pandemic. Should we use Zoom? Should we use Google Meet? Should we use Skype? We'll touch on that. I'll give you my 2 cents, and then you'll kind of be able to do what you want to do. I do want to address one quick thing before we dive into the material, and that is, I think I brushed on this last week, and if I didn't, it's a good thing that I'm bringing it up anyways. We need to think about what a podcast is and is not. And I think I touched on this, but I'll reiterate it now anyways. A podcast is not a 5-minute, 10-minute, 15-minute, 20-minute even one-time recording that we're going to post on our website or on social media, etc. A podcast is a show. Do not call a soundbite or a promotional thing that you're doing, whether it's a video or an audio-only recording, do not call those things podcasts. They are disingenuous to your audience, and they will ostracize your audience and ultimately will kill your credibility before you even get off the ground. So do not call a singular recording a podcast. A podcast is a well thought out series style or weekly or monthly or whatever style of show you want to do, which we'll talk about a little bit again today, show that you produce that brings your target audience or your community to one place and projects you as a center of influence in that space. Okay, whether it's as a host or as a producer or as an organization, can be a center of influence as well. Okay, so please be careful not to call a singular soundbite or a singular promotional video recording or something along those lines a podcast. It's not. That is not a podcast. Okay. Again, About Me is on the screen. We went over this last week. There's some websites here. There are also some Instagram handles on the first slide. Please go and follow our organizations. We really appreciate it. That's how you can help us to grow. And by the way, that's a call to action, which we'll talk about in a little bit as well. So today we're going to cover production essentials. I'm going to give you tips for successful production. I'm going to talk about structure with some examples. And I'm also going to provide you with a cheat sheet for you to have with you that you can fill in for your recordings. You can take that right from the slide if you want to and use it. We'll also talk a little bit about equipment, and we'll talk a little bit about using that equipment. I want to be really clear about one particular thing. You can hire someone to do your development. You can hire someone to do your production. As a matter of fact, that is something we do for nonprofits, which we mentioned earlier. You can hire someone to do your post-production, meaning your editing and your distribution and the marketing of your show. You can hire teams of people to handle all of those production tasks. You cannot hire someone to produce the show itself for you. So today's webinar is probably the most important for everyone in this webinar group. So make sure you pay attention, take good notes, ask good questions. I'm here to try to help you, but I can only help you if you tell me how I can best help you, okay? So please do so. Quick fun fact from the video world or film world in general, it's called footage because celluloid film that they used to record films on used to be measured by the foot. So that's where the term footage comes from. And today we'll be talking a little bit about recording footage with a camera, for example, if you're going to do a video version of a podcast. Now, I personally have been doing them now myself. The podcasts that we produce for others do incorporate video as well. And I personally am a big fan and think that that is where the industry is headed. When you distribute and when you put your podcast out to the world, it gives you additional options because now I have additional video, social media content. I have additional content to post on YouTube, which is the world's second biggest search engine. And spoiler alert, it's owned by Google, the world's biggest search engine. So it's important to be in that space as well. And you can still distribute to all of the other audio platforms. It's a little bit more work. It takes a little bit more forethought. And the equipment obviously costs a little bit more if you're going to do it yourself, but there are significant benefits that far outweigh the cost or the barrier to entry to do that. Okay, quick pre-production recap from last week. And I'm going to talk a little bit fast because we have a lot of material to go through. And as I said, in my personal opinion, this is the most important piece of this 4-week series for all of you because you need to be really sharp. I cannot get on the microphone for you and be the host of your show. You have to take the reins, right? So we want to build up your skills today. We want to talk about the things that you need to think about before, during, and right after your production. So within the production bubble. And we want to make sure that we're putting out the best content for our audience possible, okay? So last week we talked a little bit about the pre-production aspects of content production. Our goals were to start to build our materials to create a first episode, which will likely be what we call an episode 0. The episode 0 is, in fact, a singular 5-minute-ish recording, but again, it's part of the bigger whole of a podcast where we sit down and we just introduce ourselves to our potential audience and we tell them a little bit about what they can expect in the coming seasons or from the show at large, and then ask them through our calls to action to follow, like, subscribe, etc. our show, okay? We also want to build our show outlines in pre-production. So if we're bringing on guests to help bolster our content, which I highly recommend, because if you're bringing on guests to be on your show, that's a lot less work that you need to do to carry the show itself, right? So if you're bringing on guests, let's say you're a nonprofit organization and you're trying to get more engagement or increase your donorship or just increase awareness about your organization and the mission that you're striving to help with, well, bringing on guests that are tangential stakeholders in that space allow me to build content, allow me to build relationship capital with those guests, and allow me to build this show out, this series out, without needing to do all of the heavy lifting by myself or with my actual team. Okay, so guests can be a huge point of leverage, increase your show. Plus, on the back end, when we get to distributorship, when we're distributing the show, we'll talk a little bit about how you can use guests to hopefully present your show to new audiences, right? Essentially sharing in your network with your guests. So we're going to use those show outlines both on the day for production, so that's why we prepare them in pre-production, and eventually as what we call show notes. And the show notes are used when we're distributing the show as a text version. So if you go listen to any podcast, there's most likely some version of text under that episode on your phone or on your computer. that describes what you'll hear on that particular episode and has other details like links back to the website, etc. Okay, so the show notes and your outline are essentially the same thing, and they're going to help you also as a safety net to prevent dead air. And one of those things that we want is we want this conversation with our guests or with whoever's on the show with us, even if it's myself and a colleague creating a show where we're just doing all the talking. We want it to be free flowing and prepared, but somewhat informal, an informal discussion. Okay, so that's what our outline is for and what we're going to use it for. Now, again, I'll reiterate that hiring an editor or an organization like ours to do your editing is usually worth its weight in gold. I do personally edit my own podcast. I taught myself how to do it, but it is a lot of work. And they tend to cost around $60 to $140 per finished half hour of audio. So if you're recording half-hour episodes, they'll cost you in that ballpark per episode just for the editing. That's not for distribution. That's not for posting the episodes. That's not for helping you with show notes and post-production oriented tasks. But a good one is worth their weight in gold. Now, you may be able to find a college student that has some skills that's done their own podcast, but beware of going cheap, because you may get cheap quality or you may not get what you asked for from those individuals. There are really great college students out there who work well as interns for your organization that might have some of these skills. So you maybe want to be asking them if they've ever done a podcast, been a part of a podcast, listened to podcasts while you're hiring them. But again, you may just want to hire an actual professional for post-production. But we will talk a little bit about post-production. I unfortunately I'll show you the software, I'll show you how it works, I'll give you a broad idea, but I'm not going to be able to teach you literally how to edit because there are too many variables in the mix. But I'll show you more or less on the software, one of my own episodes, and how I go through the editing process. But that's next week's lesson. And that may be a little overwhelming. So I don't want anyone to abandon ship. You got to hang on and stay with us. And I'm happy to answer questions, as I said, to help you to try to understand this a little bit better. But good skills in production, good skills when we're recording, will make our lives easier when we edit, and will therefore either cost you less money or make your life easier when you edit. If you want a ballpark idea of what each episode of my podcast, Self-Made Strategies, takes, it's roughly all in around 8 to 12 hours per episode of full-time investment. Now, as things get better, and as you get sharper, and as you creep up over 100 episodes or so, you'll see that number dwindle. But until 100 episodes, I would say that it's safe to say that you have to set aside 8 to 12 hours per episode if you're going to do all of this by yourself. So that's why an editor is valuable. That's why a pre-production team is valuable, et cetera. Okay, building out your team to support you will help to reduce that time so that you can maybe put an intern on some of the pre-show things you need to do in pre-production, like get the guest's background and bio and email the guest and make sure that they're good for the episode and that they're going to be there. All those things you can have an intern do. You don't need to do that yourself. But if you're failing to do that, you can expect that you're looking at 8 to 12 hours, and that is a serious, hard number. I will tell you, I've produced, again, a lot of podcasts, not only my own, and that is the average number for most people, okay? All in for each episode. All right, so another thing we need to look at is our equipment, right? We need to make sure that our equipment's clean, it's in working order, that it's turned on. Now we're in the production mode, right? We're sitting down, we're getting ready to record. Is my camera actually on, and is it recording? Sounds obvious, trust me, it's not. And is the camera not only recording, but is the camera's lens cap off, right? And you kind of can't see it because it's a little dark back here, so I'll use my cell phone light, but is the camera's lens cap off, right? So in this case, it is, right? The lens is exposed. And I'll bring the camera over in a second to talk about it. So is it recording? Is it plugged in? Does it have a memory card in it? Is the record light on? Am I recording? Is it connected to my computer if I need the camera to go to the computer image, if I'm doing it over Zoom or Google Meet, which we'll talk about? Are all of those things ready to go? Are the levels set on my mixer? Is everything with my sound equipment ready to go? Okay, is my microphone in good working order? And we'll talk a little bit about microphones as well. Is everything that I need to record a successful podcast episode ready to go so that I can focus my efforts on everything else that's happening once the guest arrives and we're ready to record? If you are going to record a remote session with a remote guest, and we are not out of the woods yet in the pandemic, unfortunately, obviously, so that may be the case for the immediate future. If you're going to do that, then is your Zoom or your Google Meet recording? Is the guest, are you hearing feedback when the guest first comes on? Can you hear this yourself? Are they in a quiet place? Do they have headphones on? They should if they don't, okay? Are all of your things ready to go? How are your sound levels? Is it really maxing out and blasting through your ears? Don't turn your computer sound down. You need to figure out what needs to change to correct that, right? And it might be that the guest is talking into this mic isn't on right now, not connected to the computer right now, but is the guest's face right up against the microphone, and is the mic super sensitive? And if so, do you need to have the mic come away a little bit? By the way, if you're going to do this yourself, one of the things that you need to learn is never, ever put the mic directly in front of the person's face. You can't really hear this because the mic's not on, but you would hear what's called plosives. So when the sounds P's or other consonants are made, there's a puff of air that comes out and it hits the mic and makes what's called a plosive sound. So generally speaking, the mic should be off to the corner of the person's mouth, close to their mouth, but off to this corner of my lips, so that the sound is crossing the diaphragm of the microphone, the mic's picking it up, but the plosives are blasting past the microphone and not causing a disruptive sound. So better recording is going to equal an easier time when you are in editing if you're doing it yourself. By the way, YouTube is in fact a treasure trove of a lot of this information, including how to edit depending on the software that you choose. I'm going to make a recommendation on phenomenal software that the pros, including myself, use to edit everything, not just podcasts, that you can actually get for free and is robust enough for what you're going to be doing if you wanted to edit yourself. And you'll see that that's the software I use next week. Okay. So that being said, you've got your mic set up, you've got your camera, everything is recording, lights are on, your Zoom or your Google Meet is recording, depending on what you're using. If you're doing a remote session, guest is good. All of those things are ready to roll. So we move on to the next steps. Make sure that if we're going to use software, and I will warn you, I stopped using software a long time ago. And the reason is it's not if, it's when software will crash if you're recording directly to your computer. This stuff is very taxing on most even high-end computers. And so it eats up a lot of RAM, it eats up a lot of your memory, and eventually it will crash, not if, when it will crash during a recording. So use the software after the fact. As I've said last week and now this week, make sure you use outside of the computer equipment to record it. If you're recording a guest remotely, you use Zoom or Google Meet, and you're at the mercy of that software, but at least you have control over everything else. I have my camera recording me. I have my mic recording me. I have the mixer recording separately my mic and the sound coming out of the computer. We'll talk a little bit about that stuff, no problem. Or if you buy the mixer that I'm going to recommend, and I have no skin in the game, I've just used this mixer for a very long time. It's very user-friendly. Any one of you could use it. And if you were doing an audio-only podcast, it would actually be a fairly simple process. And that's the Rodecaster Pro. We'll talk about it a little bit later. Using that mixer, you can even plug your cell phone into it, or using Bluetooth, use your cell phone as a medium for your guest. Again, caveat is Zoom is going to produce bad audio quality. Google Meet is going to produce bad audio quality. A cell phone is going to produce even worse audio quality. Okay, it'll sound like you're recording a phone call. Your mic will be fantastic. The guest will sound like they're in a vacuum chamber from a phone call, basically. So it's not going to be the best. I do recommend that if you're going to record remote, what you do is you take your Rodecaster Pro, you plug your trusty microphone into it with an XLR cable, which is dangling here from my microphone. It's just a microphone cable. It's called XLR. We'll talk about that in a second as well. You plug that into your Rodecaster Pro for your mic. You make sure your mic is on. You got your levels right around the midpoint of the gain lever there. It's very simple, very straightforward. Got your micro SD card in there to record. You hit record, the button lights up red. No ifs, ands, or buts, very straightforward. And then what you do is you take a USB from your computer and plug that right into the Rodecaster Pro. It's got a USB slot to plug your computer into it, and you record sound from your computer. Now, the one little tiny nuance there is that, guess what? If you get a phone call and your phone calls go to your Mac like mine do, when that phone rings in the middle of your podcast, that's going to disrupt whatever your guest is saying. And we can't do much to edit that out. However, you can also, of course, shut off all of those things and go through the nuances of your own computer at home or at your office or wherever you're recording, and make sure that those things are set so that they won't interrupt you. They won't disturb you during the recording. So just a little tip, helping you to avoid some of the production problems that you want to avoid. So that is probably your best bet for recording an audio only podcast remotely. Now, quick tip on that as well. If you are going to record a podcast and do video and it's going to be remote, do not use Zoom. Use Google Meet. It will make your life that much easier. Trust me, I've used both. I've done many, many podcasts with both. Zoom will cause you many more issues in editing and post-production than Google Meet will. Okay, so just again, a little bit of advice from experience that you want to avoid. Do we have any questions at the moment?
No.
Nothing. Okay, good. They're either asleep or I'm dead on accurate with all of this stuff, so no problem. Just kidding. Okay, so again, you want to check your topics going into this. So you want to look at your outline. You want to make sure that the general topic that your guest is going to be talking about are covered, that you've covered those with your questions, your bullet points. You want to know the key points. So again, bullet points will be your friend. Do not script your questions. Okay, you want your questions to come naturally. Your outline should really just be a safety net if the conversation dies. Okay. You need to know the order in which you're going to cover those points, but be flexible and listen to what your guest is talking about, because interesting things will pop up and you may want to tangentially segue away from certain things. Okay. And then make sure that you know how to pronounce their name. If you don't know, it's always more respectful once you get the guest on to say, hey, by the way, real quick, how do I pronounce your name? I just want to make sure I get it right. They will appreciate that. Okay, so make sure you ask. I did that last week on a podcast, as a matter of fact. Okay, so you also want to make sure that as part of everything that you have on the sheet that you have in front of you, which you should have a physical sheet, do not rely on digital, because if your computer crashes, there goes your recording for the day. So I print out a sheet with my guest's intro, my questions that I plan on asking them, then some call to action checks, which are basically calls to action are things like, hey, please don't forget to visit our website and subscribe to the show. We really appreciate it. Or share it with someone you think might enjoy this episode, yada, yada, yada. And then you also want to have what's called an outro. Thanks for joining us this week. Next week or on the next episode, you'll hear so-and-so if you know that information. Would love to have you hit subscribe, join us, bring back another call to action, doesn't hurt, close out the episode, and then do your outro music, etc. You should have all of that stuff on your sheet so that you can kind of go down the list and just check it off and make sure that you don't forget. Now, one of the most important things is you have to remember that you are talking to one. There's a service called Blueberry, which is a hosting service. It's the hosting service that I use. So if we produce your podcast or one of our clients' podcasts, they're all hosted on Blueberry under my network. So I had the CEO, the founder of Blueberry on my show. It's totally awesome. It was really, really nice of him to make the time to join us. And during that episode, he said he has a Post-it on his computer that says, remember, you are talking to one. You are talking to that one person in your target audience, okay? So you should be using the word you a lot, like I am right now, right? So that you're engaging them and bringing them in. I can't hear you or interact with any of you right now, unfortunately, because I do like the interaction, but I can't really talk to any of you, but I'm still, hopefully, if I'm doing this right, bringing you into the discussion because I'm using the word you. So to the listener, they're feeling like they're included in this discussion. And that is the point of a podcast as a medium, okay? It's your opportunity to engage with and sort of virtually hug your audience, your target audience, or your circle of influence, your community, whatever term you want to use, okay? And to that end, you need to be providing value to that individual each step of the way. Now, that individual hopefully is thousands of people or however many people tune into your show, but nonetheless, you need to be trying to provide value to that one individual and at the same time, the entire community through your delivery, right? So you need to work on your public speaking skills a little bit. You need to work on your professional presentation, your outline, your notes that you bring with you will help you to stay organized and to deliver that content in an eloquent fashion, okay? And again, those production notes are going to be a lifeline for you. Now, one other quick tip is make sure I always have a pen in my pocket, always. So make sure you have a pen with you or two pens at your production when you're sitting down with that piece of paper. And this is another reason to print it out so that you can jot down notes, check things off, make sure that you hit on the points that you want to, circle things, cross things out. If a question or a point is no longer relevant because of the direction that the conversation went in, then you may want to cross that out. Quick little sidebar, make sure you're not pounding on the table or using your hands or any of that during the show, because if you hit the microphone, I don't know if you can hear it if I do that, but if you hit the microphone, there will be a scratching sound that will ruin your recording. So if you're somebody that talks with your hands, make sure that the mic is in a position where, let me try to get this down a little bit. Here you go. So make sure that the mic is in a position where I can still talk with my hands out here without hitting this microphone, right? Now, if I hit the microphone anywhere, including the mic stand, what may happen is I'll get a very loud pop that's uneditable, aside from cutting it out, literally. So you would lose that piece of content that it was overlaid on. So be careful with that. Be careful with your hands, be careful with your feet, be careful with ambient noise. Try to record in a time and in a place where you're not going to be disturbed, okay? All right, episode 0. Or your first episode. However, I think it should be an episode 0 for a variety of reasons. And again, here comes another tip. That is the day that you decide to launch your show. And by the way, just quick sidebar, I recommend recording at least 5 episodes before you decide to hit the launch button on your show. I would even say that my personal minimum is we don't air a show without having all 10 episodes in the can, as they say, meaning recorded. It may not all be edited, but that's because I'm very confident and very fortunate with the team I have around me that I know that, if we have 3 or 4 episodes edited, I can rely on them to meet their deadlines, okay? But for a newbie podcaster, I would certainly say record a minimum of 10, which is your full season, and edit at least 7 before you hit launch. Now, here's the quick tip that I'm going to offer you. Podcasting, although well-developed and now becoming a bigger and bigger industry, is still reliant on the internet, right? And therefore, launch day is like anything can happen. So if you're thinking to yourself, oh, I'm going to launch on September 21st, or in my case, I launched on March 21st, and this is a lesson I learned the hard way twice now, but we no longer do this. And that lesson is, guess what? March 21st came, we had all of our stuff ready to roll. I recommend that you launch with 3 episodes. And the reason that you launch with 3 episodes is because if somebody does find your show, or when you're presenting it to other people, you want them to have enough content to keep them happy and to kind of get a flavor for what each episode's going to be like. So you need multiple episodes out there. So at least 3. And you think, okay, we've got all 3 episodes, we're ready to go. Let's launch them on March 21st. So March 21st at 12:01 a.m., they're going to be everywhere for the world to see, and it's going to be awesome. It's going to be the best podcast ever. Guess what happens? Well, each podcasting service, first and foremost, has its own lag times, depending on volume, depending on a variety of factors. So no podcast hosting software, no podcast RSS distribution platform, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, iHeartRadio, Spotify, Audible, whatever, take your pick. None of them will guarantee that you hit 12:01 launch and that episode is there at 12:02. That is not a thing in the podcast space. So if we develop an episode 0, though, before my launch day, I can do a soft launch with episode 0 saying, coming soon in 2 weeks or a month and a half, whatever, is this show, Self-Made Strategies, or what have you, one of our shows in production. Make sure you tune in, hit subscribe, yada, yada, yada. Now I've got some content out there. I've developed everything. I've launched it everywhere so that I can work out a lot of the technical kinks. And I have a little tiny snippet piece that I can kind of send to people to say, hey, check out this thing that's about to happen in 2 weeks, a month, whatever. And it's setting up the framework and the structure, which is everything to make your life easier, okay? Again, this helps you to set up structure. And so I highly recommend now in episode 0, we do it with every podcast that we produce now. It's a best practice in my opinion. Again, going back, I think a 10 episode series is the way to go. You could certainly do 20. You could certainly do more or less than that. I think 10's a nice sweet spot number. It kind of matches what Netflix has done for a very long time. So why go against one of the best streaming companies on the planet? Just follow their lead, do 10 episodes series, release them on a roughly consistent schedule, right? So if you're going to do 10 episodes, season 1, my strategy, I'm giving you a little bit of secret sauce here, so pay attention. My strategy is episode 0 goes up 2 to 4 weeks before we launch, preferably 4 weeks, to be honest, because that gives us a nice lead time to work out any kinks. It's up there, we can pump it out once a week to say to people, hey, on this date, we're planning on launching this show. Now, once it's set up, we make sure that everything's working right, Apple Podcasts working right, website looks good, logo, all that stuff. Great, perfect, we're rolling. So we've had our 10 episodes recorded, by the way. We do not post our episode 0 until we're there, remember that. We've got a bunch of them edited, probably 5 to 7. We release those first 3 on that first day, whatever it is, September 21st, picking a random day out of my hat. September 21st rolls around at 12:01. We've got scheduled to release episodes 1, 2, and 3 of season 1, or whatever we call that season if we want to give it a name instead. And so every week, 7 days later, we'll release episode 4, then 5, then 6, then 7, then 8, then 9, then 10. So that is an 8-week distribution schedule, not counting episode 0 for season 1. That is our strategy. That gives you a nice solid, at least 2.5 months of marketing material that you now have to post about on whatever social media platforms you want to, on your podcasting platforms, on your website. You're going to have a ton of content for 2.5 months, right? Roughly. The releases are 8 weeks. I'm giving myself a week on the front end for a little bit of marketing and a week on the back end. You could stretch that certainly in terms of, reminding people after the fact, et cetera. Plenty of content for that time. 8-week release schedule. Season 2 rolls around, whether that's 6 months later or however we think our release schedule is going to be. We've got 10 episodes, season 2 coming soon. We might do an episode, 2.0, maybe we do an episode, or we could just call it a buzz reel and we don't make it an episode and we just release some social media content. We've done that with some of the nonprofits that we're working with. But the key is we now have 10 more episodes coming. But now, since we have an established platform, and since we have 10 episodes from season 1 out there, plus our episode 0, now we're just going to release one a week for the season 2 schedule, and on and on and on and on. So season 3, season 4, season 5, etc., are all going to be released in that way. Foolproof method, no reason to reinvent the wheel from a distribution perspective. You're getting 2.5 solid months, 10 weeks on season 1. You're probably going to get actually closer to 3 months on seasons 2, 3, etc., worth of content that you've created and that is ready to distribute. Okay, you tag your guests, obviously. We'll talk about in distribution on the very last day, we'll talk about sending an email to each guest saying, hey, here are the links, please share with your audience. Some do, some don't, but it's all just extra gravy that you're picking up, right? Extra attention and awareness to your organization, okay? So that's your episode 0, that's why we do it, and that's what you need to do. All right, so in general, to create any episode, but also your episode 0, you need to have your show's jingle or sound effects or lead-in intro music and outro music. All of that stuff has to be ready before you can sit down and record, okay? You really only need it for editing, to be honest, so maybe there's a little leeway, but the reason I'm saying that is you record 10 episodes and you forget to do this, and now you've got all this content, you need to edit it, and you don't have the final pieces. So you want to maybe consider doing this either during pre-production, picking your musical jingle or your sound effects. And by the way, you can go onto Google and just Google royalty-free music or royalty licensed music for podcast. Google that. You'll find a plethora of sites where you can usually buy a license to use an artist's track. It isn't going to be Jay-Z, Kanye, Beyonce, etc. It's not going to be popular music. It's going to be music created by indie artists, but you can usually find everything you're looking for: EDM, hip hop, lounge music, some with vocals, some without vocals. You can find all sorts of stuff there on a variety of different platforms. I personally use Audio. It's AUDIIO. So if you Google that, you'll find that. I personally use that platform. There are others out there, usually somewhere in the ballpark of $10 to $30 to buy the license to the song, and then you can use it for the life of your show, usually. Make sure that you read the fine print and that you know exactly what you're buying and that you are in fact getting a license to be able to use that for your show, that there aren't restrictions. Sometimes there are. It's very variable and dependent. So you need that though, because you need to edit that into the beginning and end of your show with your logo if you're going to do visuals, or if it's audio only, you still need that musical jingle and your intro recorded as a voiceover on top of that, okay? Quick fun fact, if you go listen to any episodes of Self-Made Strategies, my wife is the female voice that you hear leading into the episode. She does the voiceover over the intro music. If you have a sponsor, if you're lucky enough to have a sponsor, you most likely will not have one for season 1. But if you are lucky enough to have a sponsor, you want to have that stuff ready before you sit down and record your messages, your episodes, because you might want to record. Today's episode is brought to you by, in my case, maybe College Cast LLC, or you might use your own firm. Again, if you're not, I'm a lawyer. I don't do a podcast related to legal topics specifically. So on occasion, I might say my podcast is sponsored by Lopes Law LLC, which it is. So visit lopeslawllc.com or email info@lopeslawllc.com for more information, or if you need help, yada, 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 right? Again, sponsor name is launch into the benefits of the sponsor's product or service, and why the listener should buy it. Another quick tip. If you are looking for a sponsor, look local, look for stakeholders, look for individuals who get it and are interested in advertising to your shared audience potentially, and sell a flat fee per season. It just makes it much more straightforward than saying, oh, never promise that you're going to get a certain amount of listens, because you most likely will not. But you just don't know what size audience you're going to get to listen, especially in season one. So you don't make those promises. You offer a flat fee in exchange for the entirety of the season. Okay. And work out those deals, get a contract, lawyer brain kicking in, make sure that everyone understands exactly what they're getting, what they're not getting, and what you're not promising. Okay. They're kind of going into this with you. Then you go into your guest intro. So now it's time to welcome Jade Smith to Self-Made Strategies. I usually say they, unless I know what pronoun they prefer to use. Never say she, he, they are here to. Don't do that. Just ask the guest if you're curious or if you don't know, and just make it straightforward. They're here to talk about XYZ, talk about their background, use their bio in this space. And then, hey, Jade, thanks for joining us. Pleasure to have you on the show. Let's talk a little bit about how you got into whatever that person got into. And then there you go. That's the start to your recording. And basically the structure from there goes topic number one, you cover the main point and the supporting points or any data or supporting quotes or anything that you want to talk about with that person. And then you find natural segues in the conversation into topic two and so on, and rinse and repeat as the show goes on. Now, you don't want to let it go on aimlessly. You don't want to start talking about stuff like, oh, how's that? We're having beautiful weather in Philadelphia. Nobody listening to this episode cares about the weather in Philadelphia. Okay. So, and remember also, by the way, going back to you're talking to one, you need to put yourself in the mindset of the shoes of the person that's listening to this. They may be listening to this next week. They may be listening to this in a year. So you need to keep the topics and the conversation very on point. Don't do small talk on the podcast. Okay. Oh, well, you have great kids and they're off to kindergarten. No one cares on a podcast. Talk about the topic that the guest is here to talk about. Keep it on point. Stay to the story. Okay. Stay into that flow of the story that you're trying to tell for the guest. It's not only beneficial to you, but it's obviously beneficial to the guest and respectful to the listener. So be really careful about that. And then once you're sort of wrapping up your episode at a natural wrapping up point, again, don't let them ramble. Don't ramble yourself. Stay organized. Go into your outro and call to action. Maybe the music keys up. You say, make sure to follow at Self-Made Strategies on Instagram, Twitter, or TikTok, and visit www.selfmadestrategies.com. That's just an example. I'm only on Instagram. Don't bother with the Twitter or TikTok right now. To stay up to date on our episodes or get more information about our show. Thanks for listening to Self-Made Strategies. Before we go, show some love for your favorite podcast by leaving us a review on Apple Podcasts and subscribing to our show. Stay tuned for our episode next week, where we're going to interview Jade Smith's boss to talk about whatever. Okay. So next episode's topic and guest, if you know that. Okay. Don't project that if you don't know that. It's totally okay to leave that part out and just say, stay tuned for our episode every week. You can find us wherever you listen to podcasts on Thursdays. Maybe you have another sponsor on the tail end. You can certainly sell more than one sponsor message on your show, musical jingle, sound effects on the way out, outro music, etc. Okay. Now, here's your cheat sheet. Everything I just talked about is listed here. You've got your content elements, which depends on the style of show that you want to do. And you can see a variety of different topics in there. Also looking at the tone, the frequency. This is sort of your cheat sheet for programming the show itself at large. Now, what I would recommend is that when you get these slides, you copy, paste this right out of here into a Word document, space it all out so that there's empty spaces between these things, print it out and literally write in, what's my intro? Think about it, brainstorm. What do I want the intro to be? What are the credits to the show if we need to do that? Okay, maybe we do, maybe we don't. Credits also include who our guest is, who I am as the host, briefly, and moving on, right? Then the content elements. What do I want the program length to be? What's the frequency going to be? Again, your frequency should be season oriented. Definitely do not do a daily, weekly, or bi-weekly podcast when you're starting out. Most people, a lot of people have failed and will fail who try to do that. It's too much, okay? It's too much. Maybe you could pull off monthly, but these routine schedules also put pressure on you to make sure that you deliver. Don't promise to your audience that you're going to do a monthly show and then not show up for 3 months at a time because you didn't have a guest, because you forgot, because work life got busy, because your dog had to go to the vet, because your kid's now in kindergarten. Your audience will leave you and not come back. So make sure that whatever you stick to, and that's why I recommend the season format, is what you want to do. Then think about, are you going to do your video and your audio? Or are you just doing audio only? Audio only is fine, but I think if you're doing audio only, you're also missing out on the direction that world is heading in. Video significantly adds a significant amount of work and thought, and of course equipment, which can get expensive. So it's totally fine if you want to start out audio only and eventually transition to video. That's cool too, but make sure that you make those decisions consciously. Then what's the tone of your show? And that's partly dependent on who you are and who your target audience is. And so don't pick a humorous toned show if you run a funeral parlor, because I don't know why you'd be starting a podcast if you're owner of a funeral parlor, but if you do, that audience, and again, we're thinking about the audience, is probably not going to be in a very humorous mood, okay? Or if you're an organization that deals with people in a very serious way, or you're talking about a serious topic, stay away from humor and structure it appropriately, okay? Who are the talent and hosts going to be? That means who's the host going to be, or hosts, and you can certainly partner with somebody to host your show. Good way to build a relationship. But also, again, talent is inclusive of guests if we're going to have them. Then are we going to do a news-oriented show, a talk show? Careful with those because they're very reliant on what's happening now. And so they're difficult to produce in an effective way without a team. Are you going to do panel discussions? Are you just going to do straight interviews? Are you going to teach people how to do things? So if I were a florist, I gave this example last week, I would start a podcast about how to help my orchids flourish and bloom and really be vibrant. Okay, what are my tips and tricks? How should I plant and when vegetables in a vegetable garden? What should I look out for? How do I keep the damn squirrels off of my tomatoes, right? And that's a problem if you plant tomatoes, trust me. And so all of those things are things that would be interesting to potentially my target audience that might be coming into my floral shop. And maybe there, I want to be a little bit more humorous and I don't have to be as serious. Okay, so think about that stuff. All right, and that's a good instructional one as well, how-to stuff. People are always looking for that. Variety and entertainment is at the bottom of the list for a reason. It is generally boring to talk about my opinion of The Bachelor, which, by the way, I don't watch The Bachelor, so my opinion would be a very negative one. But a non-known person doing something about variety and entertainment is probably not going to be successful unless it's really hyper-focused and you have a particular audience and maybe you already have a community and a following that wants that content from you. And then again, your closing elements, checklist, get them in there, write them. Those things you can script. Your intro and your outro and your calls to action can be scripted. They don't have to be, but they can, and maybe those should be because you enter and exit in a structured way. Okay, we've talked about this, all of your delivery, making sure that you bring your show notes. Sorry, I think this is a duplicate slide in here. I apologize for that. It's also a duplicate slide because it's very important. Again, the concept of talking to one and staying organized, bringing your notes, a pen and a paper to your recording. So you have great questions for your guests or for your audience to think about or what have you. Now, what do you need for actual recording success? Well, when you get your guests on your show, especially if you're remotely, but this also works live, use hand signals to communicate, but explain to them before the recording starts what the hand signals mean and how you're going to use them, okay? And here they are. If And I'm going to talk to you as if all of you, talking to one, as if all of you are going to be a guest on my show. So, hey, Sally, pleasure to have you on the show. Just real quick before we start recording. And here's another tip, so pay attention. One thing is, see this camera that you're staring into, it's your computer most likely. It's recording video, we're recording video and audio for our purposes. Are you okay with video and audio being recorded? And are you okay with us using that video and audio in any way we see fit without any further permission? Yes, great. All right, now I'm going to go over some hand signals. Now, by the way, just quick sidebar. The reason I did that is because I want them on video and audio to give me their release. Okay, that's good. That's not 1000% legality perfect, but it'll save you in the long run if they come back for some reason and try to do something litigious or frivolous. Okay, now going over our hand signals, here's what you need to know. Because we're recording this remotely, I don't want to interrupt you while you're doing something awesome. So if you see me give you a thumbs up on the screen, that means you're doing awesome. Keep going with what you're saying. Don't even pause, just keep going. Now, if you see me put a pointer finger up in the air, what I mean is, excuse me, I'd like to add to the conversation, but please finish your thought in a natural way. Again, don't stop, just finish whatever you're talking about, and I'll jump in as soon as you're done and give me kind of a natural pause. So that's pointer finger in the air. Now, bunched fingers together like this, okay? Bunched fingers together is wrap up that thought because I'd like to move on to the next one, all right? So if the person's going a little long and you feel like it's starting to die out, you're getting a lot of ums and uhs and they're kind of rambling, just give them one of these, say, finish your thought, that's totally cool. And then just kind of pause so that I can segue us into the next point. All right. And then the last, but also very important one is I want to be respectful of your time. So if time is winding down and you see me pointing to my watch, that means time is winding down. That's your 5-minute warning that the show, we're going to wrap up or we're getting close to the end of the hour that you asked me to stop by or whatever. And then if I point at it again, 4 minutes, 3 minutes, 2 minutes, 1 minute, and just giving you a heads up, trying to be respectful of your time so that we can wrap the show up appropriately. All right, that's it. Let's roll. And so we usually dive in and we get right to it. All right, we have some stuff on equipment real quick and then my closing thoughts. So what are our questions right now?
So we have a few questions. Is it important to keep all episodes around the same length?
No, not at all. Great question. Absolutely not. That is the one thing that you have total carte blanche with. Every show is going to be different. You're not Netflix. This is not a fictional medium. This is what they call verite, meaning true life, real life recordings. So feel free to have a recording that's 37 and a half and then another one that's 42 and change. That's totally cool. Your release schedule and the promises that you make to your audience are and must remain consistency. Target length for a podcast, again, great question. I would say is anywhere from 30 to 60-ish minutes. Some people go way longer, but I can tell you that if you're going, and I have too, honestly, in a different iteration, I've gotten better. If you're going over 60 minutes, you're probably just not getting great content. Now, if the conversation's so fantastic and you're just so blown away by how good it is, and it's still rolling at 60, don't point to your watch. If the guest is good, let them go. You can always edit that down later. You can't go back and get what you didn't get the day of the recording. So feel free to let them roll if you've got time and the guest's got time and things are vibing really well, then go for it, keep going. But don't go beyond 60 minutes just for the sake of getting to some time. Okay, so 30 to 60 minutes is pretty good for every episode.
Okay, thank you. And do you have a recommendation for a microphone?
Yes, okay, and that's exactly where we're at. So we'll cover that in 1 second. And next question, I just want to kind of hit these in case people have time constraints.
I have seen split screen style interviews on visual podcasts. How do they work production wise?
Yeah, so a good question, a little bit technical. When you use Google Meet is going to do the speaker view for you. So it's going to bounce back and forth. Now, if you're recording separately with your camera, which I personally would recommend because you get a higher quality on your own image. And you have Google Meet as a backup in case your equipment fails for any reason. And trust me, equipment fails all the time. But you have Google Meet's recording. So it's just going to flip back and forth. I wouldn't do a split screen. Okay. And I'll explain why. And this is something I actually learned very recently. And I'm at 140 of my own podcasts and have produced 3 seasons of a nonprofit. When you're watching TV, or when you're watching something that you're really engaged in, even if it's a social media video, it's edited so that the clips, the changes on screen happen roughly every 4 to 15 seconds. There's a cut and a new scene, cut and a new angle, cut and a new scene. Or if you see 2 people cutting, it's my face and then 4 seconds, and then now it's the other person's face. Go back, watch any movie you want, go watch your favorite film. Go look at Instagram and look at the videos that capture you and that bring you in. They're jumping around. They're keeping your eyes engaged. Okay. So when we're doing our podcasts, we don't want static images, a split screen of me sitting here talking and then the guest sitting here talking, and the whole time we're both sitting here on screen. That is extremely visually boring. And trust me, that's a lesson that I literally just learned very recently. So try to make it as dynamic as possible to keep people visually interested. So the guest is talking, you have a reaction where you're nodding, you cut to you, you're nodding, then you cut back to the guest, and the guest keeps talking. And that's a better way to do it than to have a split screen up and the people on the screen at all times. Another thing is when the guest is talking, maybe I want to mute my microphone. This isn't a bottle of water, obviously, it's a controller for my fan, but maybe I want to have a sip of water. I don't need to be on screen for that. And nobody wants to see that, okay? And again, careful with noise when you're moving around bottles of water and stuff, because that makes it difficult for editing later. So having the guest on the screen while they're talking gives me the opportunity to be off screen, kind of looking at my notes, maybe jotting down a note. Nobody needs to be on screen seeing this. This is boring. This is boring for you right now, let alone on a podcast. Nobody wants to see you looking away, okay? Another very quick, super secret tip for editing that I'll hopefully remind you of if I remember. When you're editing, if you're editing yourself, do not cut on blinks. Cut while the eyes are open and staring at the screen if possible. Trust me, you may have never noticed this before, but if you edit on blinks and the eyes are closed and then it cuts to the guest, and then when the guest closes their eyes, it cuts back to me, it's very disruptive to the viewer. And remember, that's the person we're trying to captivate, is that one person at a time, right? So be very careful about your editing and your on-screen presence. And that's why you don't want split screens. So I would recommend having it on speaker view. Again, I recommend Google Meet, not because I have any skin in the game, because I've learned my lesson the hard way. Zoom has caused me many, many, many mountains of headaches in editing. Google Meet has been a lot more user-friendly on the back end. Next question.
I think those were all the questions.
Oh, okay, great. Okay, if any others pop up, we'll get to them. Okay, so microphones and a recorder. Now, I'm going to give you my recommendations, no skin in the game. I have used every piece of equipment that is on this list, with the exception of one of the cameras, okay? But I picked it because it's very highly rated by others online, and I've heard nothing but good things. I don't have one. I'll tell you, you can get it from Amazon, but we'll talk about that in a second. So, recording. You can go super high end, you can go lowest end that I would recommend going. Now, when I started my podcast, I ordered the cheapest, Far East made microphones I could find on Amazon and just made it work. Wasn't the most phenomenal in terms of sound quality, but we actually did a fairly good job. I had an editor at the time when I started my podcast, so I am not necessarily preaching. I learned over time and taught myself how to edit and eventually stepped in. And then we've gone back and forth with interns and stuff like that. And I've trained some people myself. But Microphone wise, I would not go lower than what is listed here as the Shure SM48. Okay. The SM58, and I have them. I just don't, I should have brought them with me. I apologize. I don't literally have them with me, but I still have this microphone to my day, to this day. I believe it's around 50-ish bucks on Amazon, the SM48 per microphone. Do not use a singular mic for more than one person. Each person needs to have their own microphone and their own headphones. Okay, so rule number one before we go any further. Now, what I use nowadays is what you've maybe seen other podcasters use. It's the, and I'm sorry, I have my my cord wrapped around it. It's the Shure. This is the SM7B, and this is the creme de la creme microphone. It is fantastic. The sound quality is just absolutely great. It makes, you will never have loved the sound of your own voice more than when you use this microphone. It is expensive though. Okay, so you're looking at 300-ish, I think, ballpark 300 to 400 per microphone, and they're so in demand that they're super hard to get. Okay, but we use these for our podcasts, and if you look at, you know, famous and really high-end podcasts, they're usually using this one. This is also the microphone, for example, that a lot of recording artists, Michael Jackson recorded Thriller on this mic, not my literal mic, I wish. Not this mic, but this model, okay? Now, in between the two, also a microphone that I have used that is excellent is the Rode M2. Now that microphone is just like a stage normal microphone. And the beauty of it is that it has a shock absorber inside of it. It produces relatively good sound quality, pretty darn close to the Shure SM7B. But it's like 180-ish, I think, dollars per microphone. So a little bit on the higher end price point. You could do a lot worse than the Shure SM48s. I think they're good. They're not the top of the line again, but they'll get you through it. You also need what I mentioned earlier, XLR cables. They're basically XLR or 3-pin microphone cables. All of these microphones use XLR, not USB. Now, if you look up Shure SM7Bs, you will find a new version that recently came out that I have not tested, but I've seen others test, that seems to perform a little bit better than the M2 and closer to the SM7B, but not quite as expensive. It's made more for podcasters. That has some features in it that are pretty good. I haven't used it though, so I don't know if it's good or not. And I think that one is the MV7, if I'm not mistaken. Okay, that one's good from what I've read. And that one also has the flexibility of having USB or XLR connections. So you have a variety of options. But if you're going to use the mixer and you're going to do what I'm recommending, you need XLR cables. Okay. So again, now going to the mixer, what you want to get, in my opinion, just go Google this. You'll see it. It's very straightforward. Costs, I think, if I'm not mistaken, $600. Okay. But this thing is an all-in podcasting powerhouse. It has everything you need in a mixer to be successful recording, specifically podcasts or voice, vocal recordings. Very, very robust, very good, very user-friendly. It's got 4 XLR mic inputs. It has Bluetooth input. It has a headphone stereo cable input. It has a USB input. So you have nothing but options in terms of how to connect your computer to it in a super straightforward, not confusing at all, really, really user-friendly way to do it. Super easy. You will need a micro SD card to record on, 64 gigabytes minimum. I would recommend maybe 128 if you want. They're usually not too expensive, micro SD cards. Buy one that's recommended by Rode. It's fine, whatever. Just pick whichever one you like. Get it. You plug that, put your card into the back of the Rodecaster, plug in the Rodecaster, plug in your mics. It also has 4 headphone outs. So automatically all of your guests and yourself can have headphones. And it has a monitoring headphone out as well. So technically you could have 5 headphones hooked up to it if you have somebody listening and helping you to produce, or if you yourself want to and you have 4 guests, You got a lot of options. You can take calls over Bluetooth. You can take calls over the headphone jack. You can plug your computer in over the headphone jack. You can do your phone or your computer through the USB-C jack. It's got so many options. It's really, really good. I've used it. We use it at College Cast. Great piece of machinery for podcast recording, okay? Has some limitations if you're going to try to record something more than a podcast or just people sitting down to talk, but has a lot of options. You can even do, you can plug it into a speaker for live shows, which we've done as well with it. It's excellent, it's really good. Okay, so that's good. One of the things is the Rodecaster is not the most portable thing. It's about, the size of a larger, like 17-inch laptop in size and a bit thicker. But it's still fairly portable and doesn't have a lot to carry around with it. So if you put it all in your gear, Pelican case or something like that, you're fine. Okay, now camera. Okay, this I struggled with when I put together this presentation. You can technically use Google Meet or Zoom to record. But as you can see from my image over Zoom, it's not fantastic. And if you go and compare this image, which is coming out of my webcam on my iMac, if you go compare this image to the image that came out of my, I had this camera hooked up to my iMac last week, and I'll bring it a little closer so you can see it. Now, I'm not recommending that you go by this camera in particular, but this is my go-to camera now, and this is a Blackmagic Pocket camera, 6K Pro. It shoots in 6K. It's got all sorts of cool stuff. I have a Rode mic hooked up to it. It's got a great screen on the back. It's pretty big. It's a great camera. It's fantastic. But this guy's about $2,500 to $3,000, somewhere in that ballpark. And then kitted out with the cage and stuff like that. That's pretty expensive. So recommendation is, my recommendation would be to buy one of those cameras that I have listed here. You're looking at per camera somewhere in the ballpark of around $750-ish to $1,500, I believe, for the XC10 per camera. Okay, and again, if you have more than one guest, you probably want more than one of the same camera to make your life easier. The Canon M50 is okay. The Panasonic is the one that I have not ever used, and the XC10 is the one that we use for College Cast, okay? And that I have used for Self-Made Strategies in the past, and for some of the other podcasts that we've produced for clients also. Great, great cameras, all of them. The Panasonic's the only one I haven't used, but I've heard so many and read so many things online about how great it is for vlogging, for podcasting, for those types of things. It costs $750 on Amazon, that model. It has facial recognition, so you don't really have to worry about being in focus. It looks like it's a pretty good workhorse, and you could get two of these for the price of one XC10. So I would say that that would be my go-to if I were starting out and I wanted to do video. I would buy two of these probably, and I would use them to record. Now, again, if you're going to use remote recordings, one of the things I do want to make sure that you're careful about, if you buy this, I've never used the Panasonic, so I don't know if you can hook it up to your computer and use it as a webcam. I do hook up my Blackmagic through HDMI to my camera. And again, if you go back and look at last week's recording, my image is coming through this, and you yourself can compare and contrast what the different recordings look like. They end up looking better. But remember, in editing, I'm using my video overlaid in editing, which I'll show you how to do. I use that as my video. So my image is coming out of the camera, and then the guest's image is coming out of the Google Meet or the Zoom. That's the way that I do it. I do hook this up to the computer so that the guest is seeing my image out of this for a variety of reasons, but it gives you flexibility also. It gives you a backup. So if the camera fails for some reason, I still have Google Meet or Zoom or whatever as a backup. The M50, I have not used in that capacity. I have used the XC10 as a webcam. It's, again, I think it's around $1,500 if I'm not mistaken. It's a little hefty, but the quality speaks for itself. It's a good camera for that price. There's a Canon out there that costs, I think, $200 or $300 that you might find that people say is, oh, this is a really good vlogging or webcam. I forget the model of it. I've had it. It sucks. The quality is no better than my webcam. It would have been a waste of $200. I returned it immediately. So worst case scenario, if you're doing live recording, you could use your cell phone. Although, you know, I'd caution you. I would aim, if I were any of you on this call, for that Panasonic or that Canon XC10. Those would be my two choices most likely. And again, of course, don't forget having the right memory cards and double checking if you can use it as a webcam if you're trying to do that as well. But one of the alternatives is, of course, to set up the camera sort of off camera here, right next to my computer, and then have my webcam for the guest for Google Meet, for example. And I will just tell my guest, hey, I'm recording my image to this camera over here. So when I'm looking in this direction, I'm actually talking to the camera, AKA you. Don't think I'm being rude. I'm just recording it dead to the camera. And then while you're talking, I'll look over here. So that's a strategy as well if you're going to do it that way. And you don't even have to worry about it being a webcam. You're just recording it separately. Now, final tip of the day, and then I'll let you guys go. There are my closing thoughts here for you to read. We went over a lot of this today, if not all of it. Okay. One of the quick things I want to mention is the principles of Feng Shui, this is the fun fact at the bottom, yin and yang, actually apply to video and photo lighting. So as you can see, my background is lit up to kind of bring a little bit more dark and light shadow transition to this recording. And you want to keep that in mind when you're composing your video if you're doing that. But one other tip for editing, and I'll mention this again in editing, when you're recording your podcast, you want to give yourself a clap, and just a clap isolated like I just did, because what that will do is it will record a spike on the audio file, and it'll record me clapping here on Zoom or Google Meet. And so when I go to try to sync those in editing, all I have to do is match up those two claps, which I'll show you. And that's how we begin our editing process. That's how we can easily sync things. That is also where Zoom really causes some nightmares, and Google Meet's a little bit easier in terms of sync. Okay, so that's it for today. Of course, you can email me. I'd love to take any questions for anybody who has them. Sorry, I went quite a bit over. I apologize for that.
I don't see any more questions, but thank you so much. I have also put in a link to the survey. Please fill in so that we can continue provide no cost webinars to you all. And okay, I have also put in a link to the resources document, so you can see all the upcoming webinars there. Okay, I don't see any more questions. Thank you so
everyone.
much. Thank you. Thank you everyone for joining.